everyone, and thanks for joining today's webinar. We'll be getting started in just one moment, so make sure you've either got something ready to take notes handy, or in Dean's case, grab a drink and be ready to hear some great information about how to reboot your business still in 2020. So we'll give it just one moment. Great to see everyone, some familiar faces joining today. So thanks, Tyler. Thank you, Ramo. Welcome, Gabrielle, Nanette, and Sandy. Hopefully you guys saw your coupons for free lunch, which we'll be talking about here in just a moment. Thanks for joining today, Tom. Always glad to see a familiar face on one of our webinars, as it is to see Kathy as well. Well, we'll go ahead and get started. So again, thank you for joining today's Business as Unusual webinar, where we are speaking with badass industry leaders who are thriving and surviving in today's economic climate. My name is Lisa Baining, one of Red Caffeine's account managers, and I'll be your moderator for today's session. We are extremely excited to have the powerful duo today of Janet and Dean sharing more information with us about how we can end 2020 just as strong as we originally had hoped when we came into January this year. With so many twists and turns in our economic and socio climates, it's wonderful to really focus in on something we can all take control of, which is really focusing in on our strategic plan for our businesses and making sure that we can end the year as strong as we had possibly hoped. Just a few housekeeping things today. We do have everyone on mute, so I encourage you to use the chat function or the QA option. Those are both located in the bottom of your screen. I'll be monitoring those throughout today's session for any questions that you may have of Janet or Dean, and we'll make sure that they answer those at the end of the session today. As we noted in our email when you sign up for today's webinar, one of the things that we're doing to help support other small businesses, especially restaurants, which have been so hard hit during this economic climate, is providing free lunch for the first 5 registrants. So as a note, we did see their orders come in, so thank you for ordering from Chick-fil-A and Panera, and hopefully the other 3 of you will be ordering your lunch this afternoon, again, in support of all of our businesses across the US. That being said, I'd like to go ahead and introduce today's host for our session, Kathy Steele, owner and principal of Red Caffeine. So good afternoon, Kathy.
Good afternoon. Thanks, Lisa. And so I want to first start by introducing Janet Viane. Janet, can you just, you are our Chief Strategy Officer at Red Caffeine, but you also wear a couple of additional hats. So could you tell everybody a little bit about you, and then we'll get Dean introduced as well.
Sure. If you were going after the grandmother hat, Kathy, I was going to be a little upset about that. But in addition to that very proud hat, I sit on the board of Scott Forge and am also on the advisory board for Revive, a company that Dean chairs. And I sit on the board of Juchi's Playhouse, which is a very rapidly growing nonprofit in the space of helping those with Down syndrome. So I like to make sure that I'm keeping my options wide open in terms of learning. You always learn great things from being involved in other organizations. So I'm excited to say, in addition to Red Caffeine and badass status there, I really do enjoy my outside activities as well.
Yeah, thanks, Janet. Dean, we're so happy to have you on today. And
yeah, good to see you.
Get tired even thinking about the many things that you're involved in. I thought running a company and being on a board was a lot of coverage myself. So why don't you tell us a little bit about all the different things that you are navigating and thinking about in terms of all your businesses?
Sure. It's good to be here with you, badass women. I didn't know that was a tagline. I like it. I doing a lot of things. I just come from the school of and rather than or. A lot of people think about, I'm either going to work at a big corporation or I'm going to maybe work at a startup or a school or something. And I just put the word and in between that. And so it's on a good day, it's good. On a bad day, it doesn't leave a lot of time. I'm involved in a bunch of companies. 2 of them are here in Illinois, in Rockford, where I'm chairman. And one is called PBC Linear. PBC is one of the largest manufacturers of linear motion equipment. And it essentially is a company that makes a lot of the technology that you never see behind the scenes that makes all the cool stuff that we use work, whether it's a vending machine or whether it's a medical machine or whether it's the assembly line at Foxconn or cobots making those work. All of those actuators and rails that go in the background that nobody likes to talk about. To me, that is technology. It's the part of the technology that makes AI and AR and other things work really well. So that's one company. The other one is called 3DP. 3DP was a spin out of BBC Linear, where we got them into the large commercial grade 3D printing equipment. So it's not something for in your home. It's something very, very large. And they do a lot of cool things. One of them is working with the Oak Ridge National Labs, one of the United States secret treasures down in Tennessee that makes all types of advanced technology. So down there, we are helping them build one of the largest printers in the world. We can print anything, I'd say the size of anything from a suitcase to a car, even to a house. So all types of applications in the next generation there that we're investing in there. It's pretty cool stuff. And the other company that Janet mentioned is Revive, the chairman there. So we're headquartered out of Helsinki and in Chicago with 1871 and the Connectory is our headquarters down there. So that is a health and beauty and wellness technology, AI and AR. Essentially, you take a selfie of your face as a consumer, and it recommends all types of beauty products, cosmetics, sun care products, vitamins, you name it. So that's bundled with all the top retailers in the world, like Ulta Beauty and Walgreens, down to all the brands that use it as well on their e-commerce sites to promote that. So that's just some of the commercial stuff involved. And I also teach at Kellogg School, teach an experiential learning program there that's a lot of fun, where we help companies invent new products and actually launch them into market. We've launched products for companies like McDonald's and United and Whirlpool and others. And also one of the co-founders of 1871, if anyone has listening hasn't never been there, it's definitely worth the visit. We're one of the largest incubators in the world down in the Merchandise Mart. And I'm also an advisor to the NSF, the National Science Foundation, another one of our national treasures that invents all kinds of new cool stuff. And yeah, I've got a podcast that interviews world leaders and business people and CEOs, and working on a book that's hopefully mostly got a lot of the material that I'm writing for Forbes and other groups to pull together the thoughts and the platform that we're doing called Dancing with Startups. So maybe we'll talk about that a little bit.
Yeah.
I could keep talking. I'll shut up now.
No, great. I mean, wow. So you're across so many different lines of business, and tell us a little bit about, what you're seeing, how each of these organizations are doing, how everybody's faring through this recent.
Sure. I mean, the reason I do all that is I grew up in the corporate world and then moved out to Silicon Valley and became a serial CEO. So I wasn't really the founder of companies. I would come in and help scale them to the next level. So some of them are family-owned companies, like the two in Rockford, or family enterprise companies, some of the largest in Illinois. Others are public companies, private companies. And now doing it in, chairman roles, it's I just love scaling companies. So helping them get from A to B and getting to a successful exit is typically on the agenda. So COVID has provided both opportunities for some and some severe challenges for others. So for instance, if you take Revive, we didn't really have to pivot much because we were already working on the next generation of technology that says people want to not use the devices in the store, the mirrors and the pads and all the things you want to touch in the store. They want to use their powerful cell phone to take their own selfie. So what we've seen with Revive is an acceleration of digital adoption by the retailers and the brands. They want it faster. They want it quicker. I mean, they want to launch them. These are big enterprise accounts, so you can't just launch them overnight. So it's accelerated that company quite well. And we're getting a lot of interest from just all different types of constituents. So for instance, it used to just be retailers and brands that would use it. Now it's e-commerce companies, of course, they were already there, but companies that are some of the largest, like a Facebook or a Google or a TikTok or a Pinterest. All these companies are saying we need to have a space. We need to be in the beauty space as well. And of course, there's Amazon and others, but also the MLM companies, the ones that are selling direct products to consumers, and it's just coming out of the woodwork saying it's an enabling technology that helps me sell more products. I want to see it, especially if it's digital and people can use their own phone. If you pivot or shift over to Rockford, if you look at 3DP, there is an acceleration of everyone is like reevaluating their supply chain. It's too dependent on China. It's too this, it's too that. So the adoption of commercial grade, again, this isn't in-home units. These are big meter by meter and up, size prints that you can print for manufacturing, you can print for prototyping. We're seeing I wouldn't call it a surge there, but an increased awareness and an interest in what's called additive manufacturing. And so there's more interest from companies that were constantly talking to us, had it on their flow control to buy 1 or 2 units. Now they're saying, what if we bought 100? And what if we go with 3DP down to Oak Ridge Labs and look at this massive printer that they're building the size of a building, for gosh sakes? How can we use that technology at a Boeing or a Caterpillar or a John Deere? So that the interest level is accelerating there. Again, longer term cycles. And the last one, PBC, is again, they're making all the technology that makes all of this work. So with an increase in digital adoption and digital acceleration, companies are now trying to figure out, how do I automate more of my products and services? So that's helpful. As a manufacturer, they took a little dip, but now it's coming back. So that's good. Supply chain was always an issue when you're building big things. I will add one thing though, in terms of an opportunistic project, during COVID, the CEO of PBC had the vision to say, we could get into, there's a growing space, and just like we got into 3D printing because we were making all the parts, we said, well, let's get into that business. Same thing with cobotics. He's making products that make, robots work. So he's getting now into the robotics business, and where there's a gap that we've found in partnering them with the NSF, the National Science Foundation, we found that companies are going to put in more and more cobotics, which is me operating a machine with the robot, not just the robot alone in a cage. There is a massive issue in terms of training and educating the next generation of worker, just getting them accustomed to using this. So what PBC is pivoted to is we now have a new division that takes cobotics and combines it with AR and VR training that allows any company in the world, like DeWalt Tool or a Boeing or a Ford, to accelerate their training programs. In other words, get people certified quicker, which is a problem because it just really didn't scale. So those are kind of 3 that have pivoted. With Kellogg, obviously, it's been interesting because everything's on Zoom, or name your platform, whatever you like. They happen to use Zoom. So moving education to this type of experience has been a challenge for education, and in some cases it's worked, and fortunately at Kellogg it's working pretty well.
You know what, Dean, I'd like to add to that, because I think that one of the aspects that's been happening through this pandemic opportunity is the emotional side.
Yep.
You brought up Revive and the fact that it's extremely cool technology at a time when people are not wanting to exchange, whether it's handshake, touching things or whatever in a store, but they still want to feel good about that purchase. And I think Revive helps that emotional aspect of the purchase cycle, help a consumer feel good, right? Additive manufacturing. We at Red Caffeine have had clients who have converted their manufacturing platforms to be able to contribute to helping to resolve this pandemic, whether it's making masks or sterilizing masks or whatever it is. They're feeling good. There's an emotional side to the way that they've been able to adjust their manufacturing platform and contribute to society in a very different way. So I don't want to ever lose sight of the emotional side of what's happening here too. I'm proud of the clients that we work with and the prospects that we're in conversation with, and what they're doing to drive a different sense of identification and feeling towards resolving what's happening out there.
Hey, you made me think of an example that I skipped over, but maybe Lisa, if you could go back to the 3DP slide. So during the pandemic, a lot of companies stepped up around the world, and cosmetics companies started making hand sanitizer, and fabrics companies started making masks. So with 3DP, what the president decided to do there was be part of the Illinois Emergency Response groups, and they figured out, what is it that you need? This is what we need. We need more masks. We need more shields. So they quickly went into place. If you look at the photo on the right, and started printing shields. And one of the biggest issues with shields is a head brace that actually is comfortable, is flexible, that different types of workers can use in a very flexible way. But they essentially needed volume quickly because masks weren't enough. You also needed face protection, eye protection, and quite frankly, they still do. So they quickly sprung into action. Again, we have hundreds of massive machines, right? And started printing, of course, at no cost, these units. And then, you know, we talked to all the police departments in the northwest corner of the state and figured out what they needed. So whether it was just buying the mask or partnering with another company, but the shields turned out to be a huge program. We made thousands of them, and it was a you know, beneficial. It was nice to see a lot of companies in the Chicagoland area kind of coming together, working together on conference calls and saying, listen, we can make the headband, you get the plastic, and that's not our swim lane. And we came together, connected devices, and got them to people quickly. So pretty proud of that. You brought up Revive, though. It's interesting. What we have noticed during the pandemic, this goes back to March, there was a massive amount of, what do we call it? Zoom fatigue. I hate to plug the name so much, but just this type of teleconferencing thing. And we were always looking at our faces. Most of us weren't used to being on cameras so much, you know, unless you were doing a podcast. It's just like, why would I be looking at a camera all the time? It's exhausting, first of all. I don't really like it. I'd rather just do audio. But we quickly found out through the Revive Index, which measures consumer intent and actually their behavior on the platform on major retailers and brands, we found out that the search algorithms that we were seeing as skin cosmetics went way down, obviously, because people weren't going out that much. They still wanted to look good on camera, but the actual skincare went way up to 400%. People were concerned about their fatigue and so it wasn't just psychological, it was also physiological. People just wanted to look good on camera. And we probably didn't see that coming. We saw it coming in the trend data for retailers, but we never thought it would actually be linked to, we probably should have ads on Zoom, like, hey, you know, you need to freshen up your face here. Use the Revive app and go to Ulta Beauty and get some of these products. So that during the pandemic, maybe we'll talk about this. There's two types of companies. There's ones that are like recoiling and hiding and trying to figure out how to reopen. And there is no reopening. It's all changed now. And there's ones that are saying, how do I springboard ahead and create a new future and actually use this as an opportunity to maybe double my market share? And those are the kind of companies that I like talking to.
Well, I mean, that's a perfect segue to that, that type of a question. Is it time for everybody? Is it an advantageous time for everybody to reboot or diversify or be opportunistic? Can you talk a little bit about, you know, why is now the time to be thinking about this for almost any organization?
Yeah, I mean, this is the best time probably in our lifetimes, but I'll even say my parents' lifetimes, going way back, to reboot a company, because the old model, what you used to do, is dead. Everything's dead. Any product curves you had, any forecasts, any data. I stopped showing data that was produced after December because it's just entertaining now. It's not very helpful. So if I go back to the basics, one of the things we teach at Kellogg and how I help CEOs of really, you know, large companies is say, what is the problem with big, you know, Fortune 500 companies? So if you look on the left, this is usually a builder slide, but we call them BFSs. They're big, they're fat, and they're slow. And when I talk to CEOs of big companies like, you know, Amex or something, they say, yeah, I know, you know, tell me something new, Dean. I'm like, well, here's the problem. We're probably not going to change too many of those variables. That's okay. You're a multi-billion-dollar company in 130 countries. I get it. But that connective tissue in between, the red stuff, irrelevance, obscurity, and decline, that is the trick. That is in a defensive posture. You're trying to stay away from irrelevance, obscurity, and decline. And of course, everyone always makes fun of my Venn diagrams as a professor, but the center is always a good thing or a bad thing. In this case, it's a bad thing. It's death of the company. And that's why you've seen a lot of S&P 500 and Fortune 500s, you know, go away over the last 50 years. And that curve has been accelerating for a variety of reasons. But anyway, more importantly, how do you fix that? Whether you're a small company or a big company, this is the funny part. Even startups have this problem. When you get to over 50 people, you essentially can start getting big, fat, and slow. So 3 ways I go after rebooting companies, whether I was, I've been the CEO of over a dozen of them, and or I'm just helping in the chairman roles. We focus on three things: people, platform, and passion. So the people is basically figuring out who's actually going to help us take this company to the next level. People that work in the company, people outside the company, partners, all different types of gig economy workers, even our customers and clients. It involves everything, and sounds so that's probably an hour-long drill down there. The platform is probably what we're talking about most today. These are the products and services and new ventures and things that you need to create the future. This is where most companies are thinking about rebooting right now. And then the last one is passion. Why is it that people want to work here? How do we recreate a passion that actually takes this company to the next level? Most companies are not, their employees at a large scale are not really connected to it as much. So the reason you want to reboot now is not so much from a defensive point of view. Many companies have had to do that. Many companies have been forced to go into these rabbit holes and say, what the hell are we going to do now? And the CEOs of these multinationals, or even mid-market companies listening in, they've actually jumped down through their directors or VPs, whatever hierarchy they have, and have been making tactical day-to-day decisions on things because they've had to. It's been triage for 4 or 5 months, right? So what has that led to? That has led to a lot of senior people in these companies, big and small, diving down into the details, going, why the hell are we doing this thing this way? And the cool part is, from an operations point of view, many of these companies have now streamlined their operations, eliminated people or eliminated processes, fixed their supply chain, figured out new ways to 3D print stuff versus buying them, figured out how to pull stuff back from, let's just call them high risk type of countries. And they've systematically kind of looked through their company and said, how do we change things from a customer point of view, supply chain, costs, cash? Many CEOs have never had to talk about cash. And as you know, many of them now do have to on a regular basis. So it's kind of forced people to look at everything from strategy to customers to operations to the cost and cash. So that's still triage mode. Your question is more, okay, so what are we rebooting towards? So this is the best time to say, in a down market and potentially going into a recessionary feeling market, what should we do to grab more market share, to increase our profitability, to do all of the things that we learned in the triage mode? We're closer now to our business. We know what we want. So the smart ones are saying we need to do a lot of build, buy, borrow. We need to figure out what new products are we going to build, which ones are we going to partner with and buy, which ones are we going to acquire. There's more inquisitive stuff going on about acquisitions right now, especially of small companies. And I'm talking about mid-cap companies listening in. They're saying there's a bunch of startups that have been nibbling around the edge that are probably a good deal right now. So we're seeing that activity going on as well.
What's interesting, Dean, is that my team at Red Caffeine knows this. A couple of weeks ago, in light of all this dynamic environment, I decided to go back and reread Blue Ocean Strategy. Remember the classic from 15 plus years ago, right?
Yeah, except we're in a red ocean now, a lot of blood.
Well, that's it, exactly, right? So I wanted to go back to my old version with all my tabs and my cornered pages and everything and reread the mindset there, because so much of what you just cited on this slide and in your comments is so very much aligned to the thinking that was brought out 15 years ago that frankly, I think it's pulled out every time there's some kind of recessionary, back to 1990 in the Gulf War, or 2000 in the tech wreck, or, 2007 in the real estate debacle. Every single time we run into one of those opportunities, I think people re-pull their strategy books and say, okay, how do I get my way through this? What you talked about with your slide is very much aligned with the, reduce, eliminate, raise, and create dynamic of a blue ocean strategy. It's that same thing. Make the best of what's happening here. And I love the fact that you included a slide like that. This is, I think, a chance for so many of the folks that we speak with to really reboot not only what they're doing, how they're doing it, who they're doing it for, redefine, complete redefinition mode.
Yeah, I just think the old books you can't just dust off the old books. Everything's changed. No matter what you were doing in January, it's changed. And it's your tagline, grow to market. How do you grow to market is you have to figure out the market's over here now, guys. Your business model is toast. Your strategy is stupid. It was good a year ago. Now it's not. So the rebooting now is like such a, everyone's using the word now. I wish I got a royalty on it every time they did, because they're realizing how systemic it has to be, how deep down into the core it has to be. But the good news is they've got this management team now who's been shocked, and they're not afraid to do it as much. So the big ones are a little more willing, but it does go back to strategy. The strategy now is like, why is our business model working this way? Why are we actually, we're a product company. Should we be in services? Should we be partnering with this group? Should we be buying these startups? Should we, we could die here is a lot of the boardroom discussions going on. What is our downside protection? So a lot of the governance and board discussions that have been going on the last 2 years in good times have been, quite frankly, they've just been too much on the peripheral. It's like, oh, this is nice. This is good. Maybe we should do a study on this and diversify. And now it's like, no, hell no. This is about even the board members now digging down and saying, why do we do it this way? Why does our competitor do it this way? And how do we kill our competitor? There's a lot of those boardroom discussions going on right now. What do you mean kill them? Well, over the next 2 years, there's an opportunity. Someone's market share is going to double and others is either going to be flat or go down. And the smart ones are figuring out how to do that. And if you go
irrelevant, forget about just killing them, make them irrelevant, right?
Well, yeah, make them part of the irrelevance, obscurity, and decline. Yeah, keep them with the BFS tag. And I think the last slide I put in, if you want to bring that up, kind of goes into some of the tactics of it. Might be a little bit too much in the weeds, but I started this program for the purpose of helping BFSs. It's called Dancing with Startups, and we talk about it a lot in the podcast, and it'll be in the new book. But the whole concept is, the reason you can't just dust off the old books is the whole theory of co-creation, open innovation, augmented innovation, I like to call it, that building growth platforms outside of the company now is important now more than ever. Of course, you need the best people in your company. They need to be empowered and enabled to do things, but you can't just use your own people anymore. And some companies still don't get this. So they go, yeah, we get the build, buy, borrow. By the way, if you look at build, buy, borrow, the latest survey done by, I think it was E&Y, basically surveyed CEOs saying they all want to do more of this, specifically the buy and the borrow. But then the next slide showed their survey that said, and how are your capabilities inside the company to do more buying and do more partnering, the borrow side? And it went from like 70% down to 30s and 40s. They're not confident that they have enough of the right people in the company to get this stuff done. Well, I think that's changed a lot too. Why? Many of them have now had to go under the covers, into the weeds, down into the muck of the company in order to save themselves, most of them. Hertz even, look at this. Big companies, United Airlines, others they have had to get tactical. They now know more about their company and the people there more than ever. And I think that's great, because the first thing is about, it's people, platform, passion, right? You've got to get the right people going in the right direction. So my pitch to everyone out there is like, I know you think you have the right people working down the hall. You need people that don't work at your company helping you, not consultants. I'm talking about, gig economy workers, contractors, and startups. So that's what the Dancing with Startups thing is. And if you want, I'll just bore you with the final one, which is probably confusing, but that's the one on your right. That is the grid that shows, well, how do I, as a manager in a company, dance with startups? How do I do this kind of next generation innovation? So should I go through that? Is that all right?
Sure.
So the axes there, on the bottom, it's people, partners, and resources. And then the vertical axis is, your organization, your location, your culture. So it's kind of like, that's the way this is broken out, just in case you can't read it. And there's 4 quadrants. You can enable the core people that are there. You can bed entrepreneurial ecosystems inside your company. You can set up things where you can escape the mothership. And then the one up in the top right, always the best one, right? That's like a full engagement of the entrepreneurial ecosystem. So enabling the core is like, what are you doing to enable the employees that you think are the most capable ones to have more latitude, to actually be able to innovate, to grow the company, to let them kind of go out and try things and work with outside companies. And so enabling the core, there are so many stories of innovations that were started in one big company, never ever went anywhere, and then were launched by another big company. Why? Because they didn't enable the core. The whole fear of failure thing is still an issue, guys. So sorry about that. It's not going away yet. The second one is embedding entrepreneurs inside companies. This is what I used to do when I was a child. I was like the entrepreneur inside companies like Annixter and FedEx and AT&T, and starting up new ventures and things. So actually bringing them into the company and allowing them to start new ventures and do new things with your employees, that embedding them strategy is becoming more and more popular, whether it's an entrepreneur, an actual gigster economy kind of worker, or an actual startup. Top left would be escape the mothership. I've done this a few times where we essentially start a new division or a company and we locate it somewhere else. Physically get out of the building, physically escape the culture. So when we did a cable TV startup, we went to Denver because that's where all the cable TV companies were at the time. We did another one, we located it in London. So the physical, and another one in Silicon Valley. So it's not just physically getting away, but it's allowing a new venture to be created as if you were doing a startup yourself. Maybe you use your own people, maybe use a mixture of inside, outside. So we kind of encourage people to dance in all three of these quadrants, and then it gets them better at the top one, which is, how do I like really partner with these companies and start buying them and acquiring them and doing other things? So like one example, Whirlpool, we were doing all the other three down below. We were like dancing with startups. They were partnering with hundreds of companies. And out of that came a couple acquisitions that they were saying, you know, we probably should buy this one. And we were like, yeah, you're right. It'd be an awesome thing to do. So this kind of discipline now, this is, it's not theory. This has been around for like 10 years. There's a lot of companies doing this now. But what I've noticed, Jack, to your question, what has COVID done, is there's an acceleration of this. And the acceleration, depending on the industry, is around how does my company become more digital? Like, I can't just call Salesforce and Microsoft and SAP and Google and Amazon. And I need other things that are going to be part of my proprietary nature. So maybe I'm going to acquire a little startup company that has this specific module that it's going to be proprietary for us. So if you think of PBC, they're getting into cobotics and they're adding virtual reality, augmented reality training. It's totally new for them. It's way out of the box. And they're doing that with partners, but they've decided we actually want to build and own this ourselves. Whereas other companies are saying, we need to go out and acquire something quickly in this market. So that's one way to think about it, just in terms of the framework.
Yeah, I love it. I mean, I think, you know, we've been seeing it too kind of take shape. I was at a pitch competition for future founders last fall, and I was really surprised from, you know, a couple of years ago on who was looking at these young entrepreneurs and their pitches. Walmart was there. I mean, there's some really big organizations looking for the opportunity to embed an entrepreneurial entity within their organization. And I think it's super fascinating. And Janet, I think it confirms our go-to-market model, or our go-to-market model for Red Caffeine. So I'm loving the affirmation from you that we've been doing the right.
Yeah, I mean, it's all about growth. I mean, I always throw in the word innovation because I think one of your questions in our warm-up was, you know, what is innovation? It's like most companies actually don't know the answer to that question. And that's right. It's dangerous. I will just give you one warning that what is on this slide, it's not a hobby. It's not something you can have one person do. It involves everyone, the corporate dev group, your corporate venture capital group, your product groups, your marketing groups. It involves a full-on assault. If you just have one guy that's in charge of innovation who's, you know, whether or not he's even in the same division or building or whatever, it's like, this is hard work. And it's not something you can just, hey, we went to a pitch contest and that was fun. You know, that's like the petting zoo phase. It's like you really have to make it a systemic part of your company. And that has accelerated during COVID. People are like, yeah, no kidding. So two things, co-creation has accelerated and digital. The amount of the level of digital literacy inside companies, something we measure at Kellogg, I teach this, is like very low in certain industries. It is off the charts now. The literacy might not be, but the need and the desire and the want for companies like you to come in and help them become more digital. And all my friends are like, we've been telling them this for 10 years. I'm like, all it took was one crisis to, you know, to drive that forward. So we're seeing a lot of that happen now.
Hey, Dean, I want to talk about the enable the core piece for a second, because I find a lot of our organizations.
It's the hardest one, by the way.
Well, exactly, which is why I want to chat about it, because a lot of organizations have had to enable the core just to play defense these last several months. They've really had to rely on their core to get them through, I don't know, a 25% stay at home for their manufacturing staff because they were all testing positive, right? Or or whatever it may be. It's been challenging. So clearly, enable the core to stay alive. Enabling the core to innovate and grow. That's the challenge I want to put out. What have you seen, Dean, that really pushes people to take that talented inner core staff they have and let them go wild? Because I agree, letting people have at it, you can get some incredibly crazy results, but easier said than done. As you said, it's one of the hardest. Anything that you've seen that has succeeded in that space?
Oh, I've seen some things. Some of them are embarrassing. Yeah, it depends on the industry. Depends on the industry and the culture. That access had culture on it, and it's like it doesn't always fit. So it really has to fit the culture. So what works, what doesn't work, for instance, is like in enabling the core is just a lot of dressed up stuff. It's like, we're going to be big in innovation and we're going to have an innovation lab. And here's this new person from outside the company. And he's the VP. This is what happened at Whirlpool. And this is the VP of innovation. And then the next phase of that, it became a more systemic part of that corporation, which is good. It's like it went back to the division. So it depends on the culture. Someone like a Samsung, you'll see that they are innovating, in and around and all over the company. Someone like a McDonald's, back when Steve was the CEO, he came in and said, listen, innovation is important, but we're going to call it something else. It was the digital group, because I think the most important thing to do is identify, what do we need to do? Well, in that case, like, we need to be more digital. We need to hire a chief digital officer, and they'll figure it out. And that became their innovation engine. It was like very important and participative, but it was also a focus group. So it was enabling the core, but it was also bringing in a whole new group of people at a very different level of scale, and having a Silicon Valley office and all that type of stuff. So that's just, serious table stakes. And usually you find a few people in the company that come along, and some outsiders that don't care about you or your payroll or your benefits. They're just there to make some money, but also help you achieve the goals faster. The speed at which you can go depends on who you're deploying on the outside. And you also need people like us that can say, listen, been to some bad dances, seen a lot of bad rodeos. Here's the 3 things you should do, 3 things you shouldn't do. For smaller companies, though, that let's just call them mid-caps, it's like, okay, great. I got 2 guys. I got Harry, I got Sally, just to stereotype it here. It's like, can I enable them? And my answer is usually like, well, let me meet them first. But yes, it just depends what you want them to do. If you want them to be digital experts overnight, no, it's just not going to work. They are what I call subject matter experts at this business. They are really good. They know exactly. We had this at 3DP. They know exactly what's going on in the space. Let me then bring in one other person, or not me, you, add someone from the mix that comes from another industry, not another department. People will tell you cross-functional, this or that. It's like, no, someone actually who can bring you expertise from another industry to get you into that business. So startups struggle with this as well. Even Raviv, we've said, listen, leading global, they're in a lot of countries now, but it's cosmetics, it was skincare and sun care. And it's like, okay, we need to get into supplements and health and wellness. Like, great. You need to bring in some other experts that are like really good at that. So even at a small level, if you've got under 50 people, enable a couple, but enablement is about giving them the tools, giving them the power, if you will, letting them futz around, and another word for failure, by the way, and understanding what the table stakes are, saying, listen, this is how much you can spend, this is how much you can risk before I'm going to shoot you in the head, and maybe get that in writing from your boss, so you know what playground you're playing in. What often happens, and I'm a victim of this when I was a child, is you're the entrepreneur running around the company doing all types of things, and so next thing you know, there's a new CEO, and they come in and go, who's this Dean guy running around spending money building this new business? And they tend to get amnesia sometimes when it's when things shift and change. Well, that's going on a lot in COVID, post-COVID right now. We're now, the management team is questioning a lot of the products and services that are going on, and saying, we need to tighten up this strategy and just do this. I'll come in and say, I think you need to do just the opposite. You go ahead and do that, but you still need this little skunk works of projects going on. So that's why we do the 4-square grid. It's like, maybe there's 1 or 2 inside with your own people. Maybe there's 1 with entrepreneurs outside. You definitely need to make a big bet and separate from the mothership. And while you're at it, start partnering and acquiring companies. And you'll see some companies, they coordinate all of that. So like a craft, they have a corporate venture capital group, right? And a corporate development group. They don't really work together that much. You go over to Mondelez, they pretty much work together a lot. It's just a different culture. It's a different strategy. It's a different way to say, because they are two different things. You go to a sales force, corporate development, corporate venture capital, strategy, all under one guy. It's beautiful. It's brilliant. But it's a tech company. It's digital. It's a little cleaner. But it's so I tend to find these large companies, they have so many projects going on, and that's by design a good thing. But you're seeing now, post-pandemic, a more focused structure at the top that says we need to be reviewing all this. And it's nice to do all these experiments, but some of them, we've got to make some big bets. So, I mean, the smart ones are saying 3 years from now, where do we want to be? We want less market share, we want more market share. And I tell them, like, you want to create a new market. There are new markets that are being created. The products and services never even been invented yet. So, and that's why I need to dance with startups. I mean, you can have another speaker on next week that's going to say, Dean's wrong. You don't need to partner with startups. They're just a bunch of kids running around with ideas. And I'll say, yeah, right. And I didn't say ignore your people. I said you need to bring those two together, and then magic happens.
I love the idea of partnership. I've not seen it always executed extremely well. Because I think that from a startup or small company mentality, getting into bed with a large organization, there's some caveats that I think people should be aware of. But what I tend to see most often is people talk about things and how great this, co-marketing objective is going to be, but it never really takes shape because nobody's really willing to give up, what they want out of the partnership. So can you just speak to a little bit about, executing a partnership strategy and what would be one or two things that needs to be discussed or embedded in that strategy?
Yeah, it's a often overlooked and very smart question, because I have a whole module on this at Kellogg that just, after we go through all the how do you do it, then it's like, how do you actually get a contract done? That over-incents people to keep their eye on the prize. And what you'll find is most big companies come in and say, well, we need, this, all these things checked off. And I go, actually, you really want to give the startup more involvement. You want to maybe take less equity in their company. You want to maybe give them more cash. You want to over-incent them to be a part of the solution, so they don't flame out in 6 months and say, we're going in a different direction. Or you want it to like overly work well. And so it's counterintuitive. When you actually get to negotiating, there's two things that are important. The actual structure, I won't go through that, it's very boring. It's a licensing deal or a co-deal or 20 ways you can structure a deal. And then the incentives. And whatever you think you want to give someone, unless you're really generous, think about doubling that. And what would happen to your speed to market and your market share? So that's what doesn't get measured when you're negotiating. It's like, what's more important, that we give away another 5 points of equity, or that we actually get to market in June? Right. And I say June of 20, not 22, guys.
Right.
Which was last month. I get it.
Yeah. I want it last month. That's usually what I tell them.
Right. Exactly.
Anyway, getting into the weeds there, but it is a really rewarding thing to do. And just personally, I'll add that one of the things I also teach people, and got this module called Finding Your Purpose. It's related to this. It's like many people working in large companies, like, I really like all the stuff you're saying. How can I actually start doing it? Should I quit my job and go work for a startup or hang out at 1871? And that gets back to how I started. It's like the power of and. It's like, no, you can actually do it now. Keep your job. Start working with a startup, volunteer. Red Caffeine would always take free volunteers to help you as a person can play both in the corporate world and the startup world, or the academic, whatever it is that you want to do. It doesn't matter. But you have to kind of, buckle up and, kind of put a dent in your calendar and say, I'm going to do both of these at the same time. And that is a very valuable skill. If you can go to your boss's boss and say, I know how to operate in a startup and I know how to operate in the corporate world. And I, like Dean, I can kind of be that bridge guy and help you guys. So whenever we do the Dancing with Startups program, we only do this for large corporations. Typically we know the CEO. We always look for the handoff. We're not there to do it forever. We guide them through it. We do the work for like 1.5 years to 2 years, but make sure we've groomed or brought someone in who can actually take it over and run it, because it's not going away. It'll probably be called something else, but it's not going away as a skill. You cannot sit around and grow your own company by yourselves anymore.
Yeah. Well, I completely embrace this idea. This isn't something that we've been working on at Red Caffeine as well, because we just recognize there's just no way we'd be able to possess, internally all the skill sets that some of our organizations and clients would need. And so I completely agree that it's just a better way to do business, to just be able to bring best in class and having to try and get people to level up in areas so quickly where they're just not going to be able to deliver on that, the value. So we had so many questions. Was there anything, Janet, that we didn't get to that we wanted to?
Yes.
No, I think we
wow.
covered. Yeah, we covered a big portion of what we intended to from that perspective, and I want to make sure people get their answers. So why don't we go ahead and go to the questions?
Sounds perfect. So first question is from, let me go back up here, from Adam. So Adam said, we are a small company, a re-startup, if you will, is how we phrased it. We're moving from healthcare outpatient into telehealth. So obviously very trendy item right now too. Should we expect to enable, embed, escape, and engage? Or should we concentrate on some versus others? So Dean, if you want to start there, what advice would you give to Adam and his team?
Well, Adam, first of all, congratulations for pivoting. Most people are afraid to, and they get stuck and then they die. Company's gone. So you did the pivot. Telehealth is good. Telehealth's another one we've been talking about for 20 years. Now people are like, oh, we should do telehealth. Like, yeah, no
Absolutely.
shit. You should. So you've got a great opportunity to accelerate your trajectory, because there's already other companies doing it that you could partner with. They may be competitors, but check them out. And you can really start partnering with clients right away. So whether it's, doctors or clinics or labs or hospital, whatever, it's the ecosystem, but there's ways to accelerate that. So we typically, I love B2B businesses, because you can actually go to the customers and say, what do you need? How can I make this better? What do you hate about Zoom? How can we make your telehealth thing like really rock? And I'll give you 3 things right now that I hate about it, but I won't. So that's an accelerant. That's great. So yeah, good work.
I think the thing that I would add for Adam is that as we experience working with clients and their growth strategies, they'll come and say, we want to do everything. We want to acquire a company. We want to launch a new product. We want to expand geographically. We want to, gain share from an organic growth perspective. They want to do all of this. And the reality of it is it's awfully darn hard to enable, embed, escape, and engage all at one time and do it all well. So my gut sense, Adam, is, pick one of those lanes and at least start by being very, very good at that, getting some result out of that before migrating to try to do all 4.
Yeah, your 2 are simple. You just embed. Adam, you need a couple experts in this. You guys were not doing telehealth, so you need one right away. Get them in there, whether you hire them or use them, and then engage the ecosystem, and that's everyone. That's how those are the only 2 I'd mess with at your size. You don't need to enable, and you don't need to separate from the mothership, because you're not big enough yet.
Great. Next question comes from Tom, and I laughed when I first read it and thought of a past experience I personally had. Good news is that in many organizations, we have folks who've been with us a long time. Bad news is we have many folks who've been with us for a long time. Do you have any tips on how to change culture when we're talking about this entire kind of transformation, looking to startups and enterprise? So Janet or Dean, one of you feel comfortable taking that question first?
Yeah, I'll go first with that one. I find one of the things when you look at lessons that larger companies can learn from smaller companies or startups is that it appears scientifically proven that cultures in smaller organizations are typically stronger than in bigger organizations. When you look at having to shift culture, I think a lot of it depends on what it looks like, how old is it, who's driving it, is the leader in charge really, really, really driving that culture? And to the extent that you're going to use culture as a driver in this very eclectic time, I would work on that very, very aggressively. And I'd start with the top, no doubt about it. Culture's got to come from the top.
So Tom, I don't know how big the company is, but I was going to take a mid-sized guess here. This isn't time to screw around anymore. This is your perfect time to have a come to Jesus meeting, or as many of them as possible, including some in person. this whole social distancing thing. Get the whole company together in a park, I don't care where, in the parking lot, and talk to them. I don't know if you're the top person or whatever, but you know, he or she and you, and just doesn't matter, even if it's your own group. But it's the come to, you know, sorry about the religious connotation, but the come to Jesus thing is still a well-used term when things are not going that well. So you've got this perfect opportunity to say, everything that we used to know has changed forever. And here's the good reasons, the good news. Here's what we have to do with customers. Here's what we got to do with our messed up supply chain, or whatever your 10 top things are. Just narrow it down and say, these are the 3 things I care about. And at some point, you're going to figure out who's on the bus, who isn't on the bus. And I'm all for shifting the culture. You've got to try that first. You've got to get people re-engaged. And you also have to look at, you know what? I need to start bringing some new blood.
Yeah, I mean, I will just only add too is that this is an opportunity, especially with an older generation of employee base, to have them step up and help, you know, mentor some of the younger, like newer employees. I mean, you know, people have just gotten hired and all of a sudden they're working remote. They've never even been a part of your culture. So we're in like a unique situation where, you know, we're faced with things that we've never had to be faced with before. And I think there's an opportunity to leverage people within your organization to help you rebuild or retool culture as well.
Reboot, that works.
Royalties. We're going for the royalties, Dean.
Royalty, yep.
All right, so our next question comes from Joe. Joe says, I work for a startup within a mid-sized manufacturing company, and innovation has been difficult as there's a huge gravitational pull from the core business. For example, to follow the core processes, the policies, the rules, financial metrics, etc. It's definitely hindered our growth, and the executives don't seem to comprehend the value of separation. So, question being, any advice on how to sell the idea of separating from the mothership?
So it depends what your personality is. If you're in a really pissy mood, you should just leave one day and go set up shop somewhere else. Just say, listen, I've got a new location. It's whatever, 1871 in Chicago. It doesn't cost that much, $500. Unless you have like 20 people, we have to talk. But it's like, at some point you have to stop and you have to shock them into it. I don't know how high up you are, but if it's your group, doesn't matter. Go to whoever's running the group, go to her and say, listen, we need to separate from the mothership. Be like, what the hell does that mean? It's like, it means what it means. It's brutal. It's not easy to do. However, here's some examples of other companies that have done it, both big and small. It's funny, it's probably not a great example, but Exelon, it has always had this corporate innovation group inside. And I always would take them to 1871 just as a good civic person, no agenda. And we do a Dancing with Startup session. And eventually they got fed up one day and they said, you know what, I'm moving my whole group out of this corporate building. It is awful, you know, in the bank tower there in downtown Chicago. So their whole innovation group now has their own area in 1871. And it has helped them immensely. They're closer to the ecosystem. You know, people from the company want to come over now. The diversity of thought is incredible, and they're able to partner with people just like that around the world, not just, you know, in Chicago. But it's tough. I mean, you've got to have some one-on-one discussions about the value and the benefit of it. But the worst part is not maybe not leaving, but I'm just reading your question now. It's like all these rules and regulations and financial controls, all the crap that large companies have to measure is very important for them. It is also startup killers. That's not how you measure startup. It's about momentum and growth and share, or you're dead. So it's like, come up with this list. Say, listen, here's what we're going to do. If we do any of these things, you can kill us, but leave us alone if we're doing this. Just start with that little list.
That's what I would have said. I think quantifying the value of the innovation is going to get attention. You know, if you can demonstrate some level of return or some level of repositioning in a market, something that will get your C-suite's attention to say, oh, okay, time out. Maybe I should be listening more intently or taking you up on your ideas more aggressively. If you can drive the quantification of the value, I think it's a huge.
Yeah, but the issue there is just two things. It's basically control and trust. They want to control you through the processes and financial reporting that they're used to having. It's actually laziness and trust. Like, oh, this is how you must fill this out. I'm like, oh, I'm sorry. I don't know how. And but trust. So you've got to. If they don't trust you, you know, eventually that'll work itself out. Bad, good or bad, it's going to work itself out.
Right. I would agree. There's not much you can do there. I was just trying to help Joe keep his job.
You're just way too kind. You can't sugarcoat this stuff. Joe, give him hell. Give him hell, Joe.
All right, and final question as we wrap up today's session. So of course, as we look back on the first 6 months of the year, it's definitely been, I would say, an overall kind of negative blip if we're going to look back in the year 2040 and look at 2020 and go, wow, what happened? Janet and Dean, what would you say is kind of the silver lining coming out of 2020 so far that you feel is going to impact the next 20 years of business?
Silver lining. I honestly, for me, I think there's been a very, very different level of collaboration that has come out of organizations being forced to work in a different way. And collaboration being a pretty big lesson that I think startups and smaller companies are better at than larger organizations. I think it's phenomenal the way we have witnessed and we have spoken with organizations who have had to work differently and have totally raised their level of collaboration in the process. I'd like to see that stay. That gets stuff done.
Yeah, that's good. I would say two major impacts when you look back 10, 20, 30, 40 years from now is like, this is the end of the Industrial Revolution because it was still going on. Everyone said it wasn't. Like, oh, we're in the fourth. I'm like, no, we're not. It's the end of that. It has totally changed. And the second one is the final adoption of technology that's been here since the 50s. We've had all this technology. Now it's going to get deployed in a very strategic, very smart way. And all of these companies that were like, have all these plans and thoughts and all the stuff they're looking at, they're now saying, how do we do this faster? Like, oh, well, I'll show you. It's just, there was a lot of just overthinking going on about deploying technology. So the technology companies love that when I say that. So like, you know, I mentioned them all before, all the big cats, right? But it's also going to drive a next generation of technology investment and venturing. So those of you that are looking to start up companies, there's never going to be a better time. It's hard to see that right now in the depths of what the hell are we doing? We can't even go back to the office. Da, 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 da. And that is why the Industrial Revolution is ending. One of those, the way it's coming out, there's probably 20, a list of 20, but one of the biggest one is like the old adage of having to, you know, get up in the morning, do my thing, get in the car, get in the train, go to the office, sit in the, you know, that whole office culture thing has been blown up and is shifting. Most people are saying, yeah, it's just temporary. It's all going to go back to normal. Actually, even if everything works out fine and everyone gets healthy and life gets better by 2022, it's not going to go back. It doesn't have to go back. What we have been telling people for years, like telemedicine, is you don't need it. I will show you ads and things from 1980 that show some of the first teleconferencing, some of the first PC-based Zoom calls. It's taken this long, and it took a crisis to accelerate. So I do not see that going back. And you look at companies like a Microsoft and even a Salesforce, the amount of contact they've had with customers now is off the charts. And they're learning how to do it remotely. So B2B already is a major benefactor. Consumer and retail, a little bit tougher. People still want to go out and touch stuff. But that's one component of 20 of how the Industrial Revolution is shifting. And for those of you that ask these great questions, like your startups, you need to think a little broader right now. It's like, I know we were doing telemedicine, but what about this and that too? It's like, yeah, make it bigger, make it better. So I think there's a lot of silver linings. Unfortunately, a lot of people have died, and it's a sad time still.
Great.
Well, thank you, Dean. Thank you, Janet, for participating today. Thank you to our audience for your wonderful questions. For those of you that might want to get in touch with Janet or Dean after the webinar, perhaps you think of a question later, we do have their contact information on the screen, so you can go ahead and look them up on LinkedIn, or you can also send them an email. Just reference unusual in the subject line so they know you're coming in from our webinar today. So again, thank you to Janet and Dean for being our featured guests today.
You're welcome. Good to see you all.
Great.
So, continuing on in our Business as Unusual series, we do have our next webinar on Thursday, July 16th, featuring Josh Bronson, the Director of Business Development and Marketing for Elk Grove Village. So when you think about everything that's happened in 2020, so as Janet and Dean saying, rebooting your business, Imagine if you were the go-to person for over 3,800 businesses looking for that level of support. So Josh is part of the largest US industrial park. And so for them, they've really been focusing on helping all of their businesses thrive during this economic climate. So stay tuned next week where Josh is going to be talking more about some of the things he's picked up during the last 6 months, such as building the value of your database, retooling your existing marketing. So as Dean just mentioned, your strategy is dead. So how are you going to move forward with that? And also picking up a couple key factors from the public sector that you can actually apply to your own business. So registration is available right now at Red Caffeine's website. You can go to the Business as Unusual section and register. And we'll also be sending out a link in our follow-up email with today's recording, as well as some of the top takeaways from Janet and Dean's information that they've shared. This was your first time tuning into Business as Unusual. I hope you enjoyed it. We do run these series roughly every 2 weeks, so stay tuned on Red Caffeine's website or our social media channels where you'll hear all about the next session. If you do have a question for us, feel free to reach out to us at connect@redcaffeine.com. So thanks so much, and I hope everyone enjoys the rest of your day.